I'm excited about this episode of the Elite Recruiter podcast. The reason why is because getting fired or getting laid off is devastating. It's life-changing. But how do you take that life-changing, devastating thing and turn it into one of the biggest opportunities that you can have in your life? And I'm so excited. My special guest, Weston Dowis, did exactly that. When he got fired, he took that opportunity and started his own business. So I am so excited to have him on the podcast to talk about sharing, launching, and building. So welcome to the podcast, Weston.
Hey, thank you so much for having me on. I've been looking forward to this. I know both of our schedules have been pretty crazy lately, so I'm glad we set some time aside finally to connect.
Awesome. So let's just jump right in. First of all, how did you even get started in the recruiting business? And let's hold off the getting fired story first.
Okay, sure. Yeah, I think like a lot of people, I got started in recruiting by happenstance. I don't think people grow up as a young kid saying, I want to be a recruiter when I grow up, but I applied to a job posting from my college's job connection network. And Allegis Group had a recruiting position, a technical recruiter specifically posted on the website back in my hometown. And being a broke college graduate, moving back in with my parents for a little while seemed like the most ideal situation. So I applied to the job and got the interview and ultimately got the offer. So that's how my journey started as a agency recruiter.
Nice. And you did great there. What kind of got the bug in you to maybe go looking at doing something on your own?
Certainly, yeah. I don't think the bug was something I developed while working there. It's maybe something I've had since I've been a young kid. Um, my dad always used to say that he knew I'd run a business, he just didn't know what. But luckily, I got put into a great industry that had low barriers to entry and lower startup costs to essentially get started in business. As long as you have the drive and the hustle, you can be pretty successful in this industry. But probably 3 to 6 months in the business, I was looking at the numbers and how much money I was generating for the business, and I was like, it's really pretty mind boggling. And me being an opportunistic individual, I was always scheming up ways that I could potentially utilize this business for self growth as well. So I think about 6 months in, I realized that, I was going on meetings and helping run meetings, and I was doing the whole candidate recruitment cycle and getting exposure to essentially the entire life cycle of the recruiting process. And somewhere along the lines determined that I'd be able to do it on my own.
And because I actually worked for the same company, but much longer ago. And I remember when I was there, I was like, this is such a big machine. I don't know if I could ever duplicate that. And I know technology and information has completely changed since then. But I think it was maybe a year and a half when I was just like, what I'm making for them versus what I'm taking home, there's a huge disconnect. And you saw that in 6 months.
Yeah, it's pretty insane. I mean, the training that Allegis Group offers is gives them the ability to pay lower salary. I think because training's super expensive to train employees, especially sales and things like that. So they have obviously a whole internal proprietary training program. So I think they utilize a lot of recent grads to get them on their feet and teach them the life cycle of a sales business, which is obviously invaluable, but all obviously command a lower pay rate too. But yeah, like you said, I was seeing the money that I was bringing home and kind of the commission structure, and was a little bit appalled by it when I was bringing in almost $10,000 per week for the company.
So let's walk through the story of how you got fired. What happened?
Certainly. Well, me being an opportunistic person, like I said, I started to essentially set myself up to ultimately quit my job with the Allegis Group and go out on my own. I kind of, methodically went through setting up the business, the LLC website, getting everything in the background set up. So ultimately I could hit the ground running. And, being excited about venturing off on my own, I probably confide this information in the wrong person, which ultimately led back to my boss catching wind of what was going on. And I could tell one day when she came out of her office and told me to come into her office, the tone in her voice and look on her face, I was like, oh, this is probably not very good.
And did they just like walk you out that day?
Oh, yeah, essentially, they essentially asked me to stop, and fully work for them full time and not pursue anything on the side, which I guess I had my mind made up wasn't an option for me. So we parted ways. Unfortunately, it couldn't have been on better terms, which was completely my fault. But I'm also glad that it happened because I had everything set up and I was ready to quit. But I just, I guess, was a little bit nervous to throw myself in the deep end. So I forcefully was thrown in the deep end. And that was kind of the best thing that ever happened to me.
And like, here's a thought before we go to the next part of the story. I feel like so many companies, like recruiting companies, end up creating their own competition because of whether low commissions or whatever. Like, was there anything that Aerotech or Legis Group could have done to actually keep a high performer like you?
Yeah, I think honestly, when you're in a sales driven environment, money is the determining factor of why you stay or continue to work in an industry or for a company. Obviously, I'm not like a software developer and I'm super passionate about it and money isn't everything, but you work for a living, right? So I think having a more competitive commission structure definitely would have made me more intrigued to stay, especially looking at some of the other recruiting companies in the market offering much more favorable splits and not as ridiculous spread to make commissions. That certainly would have enticed me to stay, probably.
Okay. And I was mostly curious about it because a lot of companies, like, I mean, how many Aerotech competitors has Aerotech created because they're just like, I can go make more money myself. But yeah, let's jump into launching your company. Like how'd you get off the ground?
Well, definitely humble and make your beginnings for sure. I think like anybody starting out from the beginning, I didn't even have a CRM system. I was storing all my resumes just on a file on my computer desktop. Didn't have really any business intelligence tools. Obviously, tools are expensive, so I was utilizing resources as most cost efficiently as possible. And obviously, I think that starts out with reaching out to your close network of people you actually know. So I was able to generate some business in terms of people that I know from family, friends, and things like that. And then as I started to make a little bit of money, started to branch out and do more cold business development and work my way up from there.
Okay. And during that process, I heard the company that you were working for sent you a nice little letter in the mail.
Yeah, I believe we talked about this, and you may have gotten a similar thing in the mail, which was a little bit of a jump scare for sure. But yeah, I got a cease and desist letter in the mail, which obviously I was already nervous about starting my own business, making money, being successful, and then getting a letter in the mail said cease and desist in big letters. I was like, oh God. But luckily, I consulted a lawyer, and he told me all is not to worry. As long as I wasn't stealing proprietary data and information, then I would be good, which I was not. So I was in the clear.
Awesome. And okay, so you got the cease and desist letter, a little bit of like a scare. Then like, you go back to building your company. Like, what was the best ways? And there's a lot of people that are listening that are kind of in this situation where they've been let go, they laid off. They're like, I'm going to go chase my own dream. What were the top 3 ways that you picked up new clients for your new business? Like full on steps.
Yeah, like I mentioned from the beginning, it was definitely warm network reach out. So reaching out to people that I knew in the industry in high tech because I'm in the high tech vertical. And starting the business in Colorado Springs, it's a heavy DoD market. So reaching out to anyone that I knew that was, previous military, now working for a tech company, working in the cleared environment, maybe on base, things like that. So I think your personal network is always the best way to sell and start generating a baseline of business, no matter what business you're in, I think, because people closest to you are, I think, most willing to support you. And if they're not, then maybe they're willing to tell you why not, and you can learn a valuable lesson. But once I had kind of utilized my own personal network and it ran dry, I was like, okay, I got to adapt so I can, grow and thrive. Otherwise, I won't make it. So ultimately, I had to sign up for a business intelligence platform, which I think everybody uses, was Sales Navigator, so I could start generating clientele data and information, and utilize, NPC processes, cold calling, things like that. And I quickly figured out that it's a numbers game, so I had to put my nose to the grindstone.
And when you talk about numbers game, like for the listeners, like what kind of work ethic were you doing during that time?
Yeah, I think when I obviously didn't have a big book of business with repeat clients coming to me all the time, I was making at least 30 to 50 cold calls a day, just kind of dependent upon how calls went and how my automated emails were going, things like that. I think a lot of recruiters focus on spending their time what's closest to the money. So if you sign a new client, why are you going to continue doing BD when you just signed a client? Why not try and close that deal? So if I didn't have any clients on the boards, I was hitting the phones hard for sure.
Okay, nice. And like, is there like those are the top things to do for like business development, but on the business side, because like, when you are on your own, there are many things you have to do outside of like business development, of course. What were the top three things that you didn't realize you needed to do when you actually first started your business, but you ended up having to do?
Well, something that I didn't realize how in depth it was probably financials for sure. I think a lot of people get themselves in a bad situation if they start making a lot of money and don't realize how much money they need to set aside for taxes. So luckily, I took my dad's advice and hired a CPA because accounting was not my best class in college. That's for sure. So handling all of that in terms of expenses and write-offs and keeping your financials in order is super important, especially for year-end filings, because you don't want to have problems with the IRS. I didn't realize how intensive it was. Luckily, I was able to delegate that to a CPA, though.
Okay. And I know like when people first start on their own, it's like you get this like awesome, like, $30,000 check. And not realizing, I think some people don't realize you got to like put that money in a separate account to save it for the
Yeah,
government.
not go blow it all on a new car, right?
I've seen that happen like way too many times in some of these Facebook groups. They're like, crap, like, what am I supposed to do with the IRS? I'm like, you're supposed to set aside part of every single check that comes in. Simple as that.
Absolutely. Yeah, I ultimately was setting aside 35% of the income, which was more than enough, but that helped me out long term. So at the end of the year, when I paid taxes, I still had extra cash to spend on the business, write off, things like that. So I think setting myself up early from a financial perspective has been super helpful for long term growth.
Okay, and you're also very very tech heavy. You're in the tech space, but you yourself are super tech heavy. What are you doing on a productivity wise, and what tools are you using for business development to be efficient?
Absolutely. I think there's so many tools on the market. It's almost overwhelming at this point in time. But I think utilizing tools to optimize your efficiency is super important. Helps you close more deals, get in front of more people, and just generate more face time. But I'm always trying out new tools. But a couple tools that I'm using right now is some automation tools in terms of messaging, reaching out to my network on LinkedIn, things like that, emails, just pinging and touching base with previous clients, making sure they know I'm still thinking about them, automatedly set up, 3 to 6 months out, however often I want to bother them. But instead of doing all that tedious work by hand, it's nice to just have automated tools pinging your clients so you don't have to go through and do it by hand all the time. That saves countless time that I can be making cold calls, because at the end of the day, I think cold calls is the best way to generate business, getting people on the phone, whether you want to do it or not.
Okay, and you're also building your own tech too. Like, talk about that real quick.
Yeah, absolutely. I quickly realized as the business started to scale, I had more income. I was like, I probably need to start utilizing more software tools myself to optimize efficiency. And I quickly realized that paying for business intelligence software was very expensive. Paying for B2B contact databases, things like Zoom Info, things like that, super expensive. Getting a resume database. So if you get a rec from a client that you signed locally, but they're like, hey, we have a position across the US, you obviously don't have a warm pipeline of candidates. You got to utilize something to reach out to candidates. So paying for a resume database, paying for email marketing, all these things started to add up really quickly. And there's obviously a bunch of different CRM ATS systems on the market. And I realized, why isn't there a system with multiple built-in tools that is not only an efficient place to store your data and client information, but also help generate new business as well as find candidates when you get new requisitions in the door?
Mm. So you're literally like, using your recruiting money, building a tech tool on top of that. Like, how's that? Like, are you coding it yourself? Did you hire a team? Like, what's going on there?
Yeah, might be IT focused, but I'm not a developer. That dream died when I was in computer science in college and had to transfer out because I wasn't doing so hot. But yeah, I worked with a developer for about 3 years, essentially bootstrapping development myself. And for those of you don't know what bootstrapping is, essentially paying out of pocket for a tool, not getting funding or anything like that. Ultimately, probably wasn't the right decision working with that developer, just due to some legal things that came up that I handled. But it's a learning experience, and ultimately, I got in contact with the right developer who's building out and finishing my tool. And the way that I have developed it is I built wireframes, the workflow, and how all the buttons and the software functions. And then he's the one connecting the front end looks to the back end interface and how the software actually performs and works. And then I'm doing the testing, so I don't have to hire a whole team of developers. So when you're bootstrapping it yourself, you definitely want to be as cost effective as possible.
And that kind of goes into like another question I have, like, how are you framing your schedule between building a recruiting company, building a new tech tool, and while still supporting clients? Like, how are you doing this?
Certainly. Yeah, that's something I definitely struggle with is time management, and something I've worked on a lot. So time blocking has been huge for me. Putting something on your calendar for a specific business item, whether that be cold calls or whatever, and then not negotiating with yourself and sticking to it is super helpful. So during regular business hours, I'm doing staffing and reaching out to clientele, and luckily my developer works odd hours like myself. So when he puts out a new back end commit, I can do the testing and get back to him after hours. And then he can do the development during the day on the back end. So obviously, generating money from the recruiting business is still my main priority. And then after hours, I'm handling the development of the tool.
And for people that might want to like test a tool, like, how do they reach? How do they follow you or reach out to you?
Yeah, absolutely. The tool is being finished up as we speak. So about 1 to 2 weeks out, the back end is being connected to the front end. And I have a landing page that's perpetualautomated.com, where you can sign up with your email. And as soon as the tool launches, I'll be sending out free trial information, as well as a database of information on how to use the tool and all the robust features that it comes with.
Okay, and I'll have that in the show notes. So if you're like interested, just like scroll on down, check it out there. Awesome. Well, like, going back to you building the company, you building a tech tool. Before we jump over to kind of like the quick fire questions, is there anything else that you love to share about like all that?
Oh, I guess something, maybe some insight or personal experience, or what in
Yeah,
particular?
I mean, like something that like whatever it would be that's on your mind, especially like on the personal experience side of the house.
Yeah, I kind of mentioned it a little bit earlier, but it's definitely a numbers game, and I feel like recruiters have a bad rep a lot of times. So just get used to know, and hopefully let it motivate you, because some days, when you're on that 40th cold call and you've heard nothing but no all day, it can be a little bit disheartening. So it's worth it at the end of the day when you land that one call and that one client that's you establish a great relationship with and get long-term business. It's rewarding. So you definitely have to be vigilant and have a lot of perseverance. And then I think another just piece of advice is, even with COVID and everybody being remote, I always try and do in-person meetings or establish legitimate relationships. I don't think you really get to know somebody looking at them through a computer screen. So some of my best clients, who are not only clients but friends of mine, it started with a lunch meeting. and just learning about them, their family outside of business life. So you really get to know these people. That's how you generate long-lasting, repeatable book of business, I think.
So you're visiting people in person.
Whenever possible. I mean, I always ask for an in-person meeting. Obviously, that's not always possible, or some people are not comfortable with it. But yeah, whenever possible, I definitely try and do that. I pretty much stick to the Colorado area for my business, which isn't always the case, especially in tech. But just having a repeatable pipeline of candidates to working within the Colorado region is the best repeatable way to generate new clients for me as well.
Okay, so you like niche kind of into like a location niche too, not just tech.
Yeah, I obviously everything's so remote nowadays that if people are working, all over the U.S., if not the world. I still like to maintain my book of business in Colorado, so I can get those in-person meetings and generate those legitimate relationships. But some of my best clients I have been working with since the very beginning of my business, and I know them and their wives and things like that now. So.
Awesome. There's been actually a kind of a recurring theme on some of the guests recently is like the differentiator is in person,
Mhm. Absolutely.
especially in this virtual world. Awesome.
Yeah, I don't have to preach to the choir, but sales is, if your tool is great, it probably sells itself. But you're selling you at the end of the day. If a potential client, likes you as a person a lot more than somebody else, even if their tool is a little bit better, they're probably gonna buy from you, right? So sales is so relationally based, in my opinion.
Oh, that's perfect. That's awesome. Well, on to the quickfire questions. What advice would you give to a brand new recruiter that's actually just getting started off in the recruiting world this year?
Like I mentioned, definitely perseverance. Stick with it because this industry is not for the weak-willed. I don't think. And in terms of um, starting out and generating income in business, definitely minimize your expenses. Don't think that you need to go out and spend $1,000 a month for all these tools to be successful. If you are resourceful and you do your research, you can get a lot of good information for cheap. It might take a little bit more time, but that's what it's going to take to build a business is a lot of time and effort. So working smarter, and at the beginning especially harder too.
Perfect. And same question, but for people that have been around the block 5, 10, 15, 20, 25 years, what advice would you give them to like stay successful in the game?
Yeah, I don't even know if I could really be in a position to give advice to some of the more seasoned veterans because they'd probably kill me on all metrics in terms of cold call closing rates, things like that. But I think probably utilizing tools. A lot of people are probably stuck in their old ways or just using their same old CRM ATS system. But using tools to help delegate your time to maximize your efficiency. It might be a little bit scary and daunting, but there's some great tools out there on the market that really increases your efficiency. Things like voice to text when I'm writing a long email or something like that. I'm usually never typing that out. I'm speaking it, and things like automated email reach out with red campaigns, so they know when you're opening your email, and then you can follow up with cold calls. Just maximizing your efficiency, I think, is huge, and there's a lot of great software out there to help you do that.
Awesome. And what's your favorite software outside of what you're building at the moment?
I would say probably phone burner at the moment, so you can set up a call list. And personally, I get very distracted, especially with cold calls, because I don't love doing cold calls. I don't think anyone really does, but if you just get focused and get in your zone, then you can generate a lot of success. And phone burner, essentially, you can upload a list from a CSV or other ways, and it'll just start ringing for you. So you don't really have any options to negotiate yourself out of making that next call. So things like that, super helpful. Voice to text, super helpful too. I'll be writing an email while looking at something else, which they say humans aren't very good at multitasking, but I beg to differ.
Awesome. Uh, has there been any books that have had a huge impact on your career?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm more of an audiobook person usually. I think I just retain the information better that way, for my learning style. But one actual physical book that I've read that's great that a lot of people are familiar with is Think and Grow Rich. That's a great book from just a mentality perspective and putting yourself in a position for success and growth. And then the second book is it's by Jeb Blount. He owns Sales Gravy. God, off the top of my head right now. Um, Give
Fanatical
me a second.
processing.
Yeah, Fanatical Prospecting. Yes. That book's great. It's essentially Jeb goes over pointing out the obvious, like your pipeline is dry right now because you weren't doing the hard work 2 to 3 months ago. You were negotiating with yourself. You thought your current clientele would never run out, but it's dry right now because you weren't doing the hard work. So essentially always generating new business and doing the tedious day to days to continue growing your sales pipeline is necessary for long-term growth.
Perfect. Yeah, we're looking at adding that book later on in a few months for the recruiting book club. So that's on the list for the listeners to share.
Yeah, Jeb has a great podcast too. This is not a paid sponsor either, but he's got a lot of good sales tools, and I love his mentality of just not negotiating with yourself and doing the hard work that creates success.
So what do you think has been a huge part of your own success personally?
Um, to be honest with you, I attribute most of my success to my parents and my family life. I don't know where I would be without such supportive parents. After I got fired, I think it was on a Tuesday, my dad realized that I'd been home for 2 or 3 days, and he was like, "Are you not working over there anymore?" I was like, "No." He's like, "All right, well, good luck," because I think he knew I was already going off on my own venture. So just having a supportive family has been huge for me, in terms of my mentality and having a you can do it type of attitude.
Do you do you think you would have made that jump if you didn't have that supportive environment?
Gosh, I mean, honestly, like I mentioned earlier, I was nervous to quit. So getting fired was the best thing that happened. Without that support group, for my parents living at home, having minimal expenses, if I was, paying $2,000 in rent in a downtown big city, I would have been a lot more hesitant for sure. So kind of having a safety net was definitely a huge factor for me making the move. But if there's a time to take a risk, it's when you're young and your expenses are minimal and you don't have kids relying on you and things like that.
So, and that it kind of goes like in the next question. If somebody reached out to you, they just got laid off through a riff or something of that nature, what would you tell them, like for advice wise, to go start on their own?
Certainly. As you mentioned at the beginning of the podcast, it can be daunting and upsetting to get laid off. But, if you're the type of individual that's had that idea in the back of your head of going off on your own, you have to look at it as an opportunity, right? Not a negative thing. I believe life is all about reframing negative situations and turning it into a positive. I think that's the mentality of a lot of successful people. So yeah, you're going to be down on yourself a little bit after getting fired, but you should pick yourself up by your bootstraps and think, how can I turn this into a positive, and go out on my own and let it generate motivation for you.
It's definitely scary. I know, like when I got laid off on my first vacation in like 2 years or something of that nature. We were in France and got a call saying, "You're like a really good recruiter, but you're just collateral damage, and unfortunately, we got to let you go." And my wife kind of looked over and she was just like, "Is that what happened?" I'm like, "Yeah." And she's like, "All right, let's start our own thing. Let's go."
See, that's that support system right there. Your wife
Yeah.
believes in you, so it's always good to have people backing you.
So, but yeah, and it's mostly like I know not everybody has that support system, or not everybody has that wiggle room to do it. But there's what I've learned because of this podcast. There's 1,000 ways to create some sort of income for your recruiting business, whether it's chasing new prospects, everything from split deals to fractional. There's just our industry has so many ways of and opportunities to make money. It just blows my mind. So,
Absolutely. Yeah, it's one industry where you can have eggs in multiple baskets, even though you're only working in one industry. It's pretty wild. And talking about the low barriers to entry too, great industry to get into with low startup costs. You're not creating a product that you have to spend hundreds of $1,000s on manufacturing, you know?
mhm. Well, and this kind of goes into, I'm going to ask this two ways. The first way is going to be like your first week at Allegiance Group. If you had the chance right now to sit down with yourself and give yourself advice, what would you tell yourself?
I would say ingest as much information as you can because although I didn't enjoy working there, it was an invaluable experience. I learned a lot. I learned how to make calls, how to interact with people in a professional business setting, and how to overall just develop a business and maintain relationships. So I think I really did ingest as much as possible working there. But yeah, just always be learning as much as you can.
And the same question again, but let's take it back to your first few weeks of after you got let go, you starting your own business. If you got a chance to sit down with yourself then, like what would you say to you?
Um, I would say I would say you're going to get really lucky and close your first deal within about 2 weeks of starting the business, but then you're not going to make any more money for 6 months. So be vigilant and don't get down on yourself because when that second check hits and it's a big one, it'll be very sweet.
So
So
like you closed something fast and then it took another 6 months to close.
yep,
But
that
you,
was obviously trial and error, figuring out how to generate business and work with new clients.
like,
And
what, on month 4, month 5, like what were you like, telling yourself? Was it like, hey, do I need to like? Were you? Was there a little like person sitting on your shoulder saying that why not just go get another recruiting job? What kept you going on that 6 month dry spell?
absolutely. There was a little guy whispering in my ear saying you can't do it, and then you start to believe yourself. But I think when you're at that point, then you're probably on the precipice of something great because it's yourself telling yourself to give up. But if you work just that extra mile or that extra inch, then you might be able to accomplish something great and not give up on yourself. So I think that you got to push through the last step when you're most doubting yourself.
Okay, nice, solid. And it, for the listeners, how can they follow you? What's the best place to follow you at?
Yeah, I'm always very active on LinkedIn. Super great tool. I have a staffing community as well, which I will send you the link if anyone wants to join. I share good information in terms of new tools I'm using for B2B info, things like that. But they can always connect with me on email too. I always love to collaborate with other individuals in the industry. My email is wdowis@perpetualsourcing.com.
Okay, awesome. And before I let you go, is there anything else that you would love to share with the listeners or leave with the listeners?
I would say that time is your most valuable asset because it's the only asset you can't get more of. So always be thinking about waking up every day and what you can do with your time to be great.
Awesome. Well, for the listeners, like I said when we first started off, like getting fired, getting let go, getting laid off is, I mean, it's life changing, it's devastating. But I've seen it time and time again. People that have taken that opportunity or taken that lemon, made lemonade, and
Yeah.
I know that's like a crappy saying when you're sitting in it, but like it is, it's that one chance. Sometimes it's that one time that it literally pushes you to go do something great.
Yeah, it's
So,
the make or break moment. I think every successful person's probably had that crossroads, and there's two paths, and they make a choice.
and yeah, and thank you for coming on and sharing. It's just, a lot of these people like that have been like, oh, they're good at their job. They're great. They're great recruiters. And this is probably the best opportunity due to the way that technology works that you can bet on yourself. So make
Absolutely.
2024 your best year yet. Thank you guys.
Hey, thank you so much for having me on. I really appreciate it.